My name is Natalie Hart. I was 34 when a stranger sat across from me in a small cafe in River North, Chicago, and told me not to file for divorce. It was early afternoon. The cafe smelled of burnt coffee and damp coats. Office workers murmured quietly around us. Nothing about the scene looked dramatic, but my chest tightened, as if the air itself had shifted. The man introduced himself as Daniel Reed, calm voice, careful posture, neither nervous nor angry, just controlled. He said my husband's name as if stating a fact, not leveling an accusation. Your husband is seeing my wife. I didn't gasp. I didn't cry. Instead, a colder weight settled in my stomach. Suspicion had never felt like this. Confirmation carries its own heaviness. Daniel set a thick envelope on the table between us. He didn't open it yet. Then he said one sentence that still echoes in my mind. If you move first, you lose. I stared at the envelope. My hands stayed steady, though my heart raced. I had imagined this moment countless times, thought I would scream, confront him, or collapse. But I sat still. Daniel spoke quietly. Courts don't hear pain. They hear proof. Act on emotion, and you protect the people who lied to you. Wait, and you protect yourself. He told me he'd learned this the hard way. He had already spoken to lawyers, documented everything, dates, times, locations, patterns. I listened without interrupting. Somewhere between his words and the hum of the cafe, I realized something crucial. This wasn't a meeting about revenge. It was a warning. I thought of my husband, Eric. The late nights, the phone turned face down, the quiet that had grown in our home without a single fight. Daniel slid the envelope closer, still unopened. You don't have to decide today, he said. Just promise me one thing. Don't rush. I nodded once. I didn't know it yet, but that ordinary cafe was where my life stopped spinning and started moving forward with intention. Before everything broke, I believed my life was simple and stable. I had been married to Eric Whitaker for 7 years. He worked in operations for a logistics company, long hours, predictable. I worked remotely as a localization specialist, translating documents at our kitchen table with the radio playing softly in the background. We were not dramatic people. We didn't post grand declarations online or surprise each other with trips. Our marriage was built on routines: Saturday mornings at the grocery store, takeout on Fridays, movies on the couch where Eric always fell asleep before the ending. Eric wasn't romantic, but he was reliable. If something broke, he fixed it. If I needed help, he showed up. He rarely raised his voice. He never forgot to pay bills. That steadiness felt like safety. I told myself this was what grown-up love looked like. Looking back, I realize how easily I mistook quiet for loyalty. Eric didn't talk much about feelings, so I assumed depth. He didn't share much about work, so I assumed responsibility. There were no obvious warning signs, no shouting, no distance I could name, just a peaceful house and predictable life. My parents liked him. My friends said I was lucky. I agreed. I believed that silence meant trust. I didn't know then that a home can be silent not because it is safe, but because someone has already started leaving emotionally. At the time, I thought I had chosen well. I thought consistency was commitment. I was wrong. The changes didn't arrive all at once. They crept into our days until the pattern was impossible to ignore. Eric started coming home later. At first, 9 o'clock, then 10 o'clock, then closer to midnight. He said a new contract was putting pressure on the team. I believed him. His job had always been demanding. Then his phone changed. It used to lie face up on the counter. Now it stayed face down or in his pocket. When it buzzed, he checked it quickly, turning the screen away. I told myself I was imagining things. A new scent appeared in our bathroom. Not soap, not deodorant, cologne. Eric had never worn cologne in 7 years. When I asked, he shrugged and said someone at work gave him a sample. His clothes changed too, new shirts, better fitted. He started getting haircuts at a salon instead of the old barber near our house. None of this was wrong on its own.
People are allowed to change.
What unsettled me was the timing. On weekends, he started going to the gym. He'd leave mid-morning and return after lunch, freshly showered and oddly energized, not tired, not sore, just light, happy in a way I hadn't seen at home in months. I tried to be supportive. I packed dinners. I sent messages asking if he needed anything. His replies grew shorter. Sometimes hours passed before he answered. When he did, the words felt distant. If you've ever felt your house grow colder without a single argument, you know what I mean. Nothing was loud enough to confront, but everything felt wrong. At night, I lay awake listening to him breathe and wondered when exactly the shift had happened. I wasn't looking for proof yet. I was looking for reassurance. But my body already understood what my heart was trying to deny. I kept telling myself not to be paranoid, to stay patient, to be understanding. Still, a quiet voice inside me repeated the same sentence over and over. Something is wrong. The moment everything shifted happened on an ordinary weekday evening. I met a friend for dinner near the Loop. We sat by a window facing the street, traffic lights reflecting off the glass. People passed by with umbrellas and briefcases. I was mid-conversation when my eyes caught something familiar across the street.
Eric.
He was seated at a small table inside a cafe. At first, I felt relief. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe work really had kept him late. Then I saw the woman sitting across from him. She had dark hair and wore a wine-colored coat. They leaned toward each other as they talked. Eric was smiling. Not the polite smile, not the tired one he brought home. This smile was open and relaxed, one I hadn't seen in a long time. My chest tightened. I couldn't hear anything. It was as if the restaurant around me had gone silent. Then he reached across the table and took her hand. It wasn't dramatic. It was casual, familiar, the kind of touch that doesn't ask permission because it's already happened many times. I didn't move. I didn't stand up or rush outside. My body simply refused to respond. My friend noticed my expression and followed my gaze. She grabbed my arm and whispered that we should leave. I let her pull me away. My legs felt weak, like they no longer belonged to me. I went home alone. The apartment felt different that night. The couch, the kitchen, the photos on the wall, everything looked staged, like a set I no longer belonged in. Eric came home after midnight. He spoke casually, asked why I was still awake. His voice was normal, too normal. I looked at his face and realized something painful. A person can lie calmly when lying has become routine. I didn't confront him. I asked a gentle question about work. He answered without hesitation and walked into the bathroom. I sat on the couch, listening to the shower run, and made a decision. I would not react. Not yet. Because once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. And I needed to be smart about what came next. Starting the next morning, I lived a double life. On the outside, I was the same wife. I made coffee. I asked about his day. I said goodnight. On the inside, I watched everything. I started small. I wrote down the time Eric left and the time he came home. I noted weekends. I noted excuses. I didn't follow him. I didn't check his phone. I only observed what was already visible. When he said he was working late, I drove past his office once. His car wasn't there. I told myself not to panic. One absence isn't proof. When he said he was going to the gym, I casually asked which one. Later, I checked the membership online. He had signed up. He had checked in once. That was when the weight hit me. Knowing someone is lying without being able to prove it feels like hearing a smoke alarm with no fire in sight. You can't relax, but you can't act either. I didn't tell my friends. I was ashamed. I felt foolish for not seeing it sooner. I was also afraid to say the words out loud without evidence. I met quietly with a divorce attorney and told him everything. He listened, then said something I didn't want to hear but needed to understand. Suspicion is not evidence. Without proof, emotion works against you. Confrontation only teaches the other person how to hide better. Courts don't reward pain. They require facts. I left his office feeling heavier than when I arrived, but I also left with a rule. Don't move until you can prove. That meant pretending, smiling, sleeping beside someone who was already gone. It was the loneliest thing I've ever done, but it was necessary. Daniel Reed appeared on a Tuesday afternoon. I was working from home when the doorbell rang. I assumed it was a delivery. When I opened the door, a man stood there holding a folder under his arm. Early 40s, well-dressed, calm eyes. He asked if I was Natalie Hart. We sat at a quiet diner a few blocks away. He didn't waste time on small talk. My wife is seeing your husband. Hearing it out loud felt different from seeing it myself. The truth landed heavier, more final. Daniel told me his wife's name was Brooke Lancaster. He said the affair had started months earlier, late nights, weekend trips, the same pattern I had been living through. Then he opened the folder. Inside were photographs. Eric and Brooke at restaurants, walking together, entering a movie theater, standing close in a parking garage. Each photo was labeled with a date and location. I recognized her immediately. The wine-colored coat. The same woman from the cafe. Daniel explained that he'd hired a professional after his suspicions became impossible to ignore. Everything was documented methodically, no emotion, just records. He didn't gloat. He didn't insult my husband. He spoke the way someone does after they've already cried alone and moved past the shock. I felt two emotions at once, relief and grief. Relief because I hadn't imagined any of it. Grief because it was real. Daniel slid a flash drive across the table. You'll need this if you decide to protect yourself, he said. I asked why he was helping me. Because we're in the same position, he answered. No one should go through this blind. Before we left, he gave me his number. Call if you need clarification on any of the files. As we stood, he paused. I will reach out again, he said. There is something important we need to discuss. 3 days later, he called. His voice was more deliberate this time. He said he had a plan. We met again at the same cafe in River North. Daniel was already there when I arrived. He didn't stand. He waited until I sat down. Then he reached under the table and lifted a hard black case onto the empty chair beside him. The sound it made on the floor was dull and heavy. He didn't open it immediately. Before I show you this, Daniel said, you need to understand something. This is not about revenge. This is about timing. Then he opened the case. Inside were stacks of cash, neatly bound. I didn't need to count it to know it was a large sum. My breath caught. Daniel looked at me steadily. I am asking you not to file for divorce yet. My first reaction was anger. It felt wrong, like being bought. I told him immediately, I'm not for sale. He nodded, as if he had expected that. I know, he said. That's why this is not a bribe. It is compensation for endurance. He explained slowly. If I filed now, Eric would panic. Panic would reach Brooke. They would cut contact, destroy evidence, rewrite their story. What seemed clear now would blur in court. Waiting would do the opposite. Patterns would deepen. Evidence would multiply. Excuses would vanish. Daniel planned to wait 3 more months. During that time, he would continue documenting everything legally and carefully. He asked only one thing of me. Do not move first. No emotional messages, no confrontations, no sudden changes, just normal behavior and the facts that already existed. I asked why he needed me specifically. Because if you move first, your husband will warn my wife, he said. Everything I've built will collapse. The weight of it settled on me. Our situations were connected. One wrong move from either of us would protect the people who betrayed us. I stared at the case again. 3 months felt unbearable, living in the same house, acting normal, carrying this knowledge alone. Daniel closed the case and slid it toward me. This money does not buy your silence, he said. It buys you space, time to think clearly instead of reacting from pain. I didn't touch it for a long moment. Then I nodded. I agreed to wait. Not for the money, but because I wanted to end this the right way, with proof instead of rage, with dignity instead of chaos. I carried the case home that day, feeling its weight not as cash, but as a decision that would change everything. The following weeks demanded a discipline I didn't know I had. Nothing in my routine changed. I still made breakfast. I still asked neutral questions. I still wished Eric a good day. From the outside, our marriage looked intact. Inside, I was documenting everything. Daniel and I agreed on strict rules. No emotional messages, no opinions, only facts, dates, times, locations. If it couldn't be proven, it wasn't shared. When Eric claimed late meetings, Daniel confirmed Brooke had left her office at the same time. When Eric said he was traveling, Daniel quietly checked flights. Patterns began to overlap too perfectly to be coincidence. I found the condo lease by accident while searching for a utility bill. Evanston, 2 bedrooms. Eric was the sole signer. The lease dated back weeks before his excuse about work stress. I photographed every page and returned the documents exactly where they were. Daniel said I had done the right thing. Evidence only matters when it's clean, no scenes, no accusations, no digital footprints that could be questioned. We treated it like an audit. Every meeting logged. Every overnight stay recorded. Every shared location strengthened the file. Eric grew more relaxed at home, lowering his guard. He believed he had successfully divided his life into separate compartments. That's the mistake people make when they lie long enough. They begin to believe they're in control. One evening, he mentioned a short business trip to Tampa, Florida, 3 days. I smiled and told him to have a safe flight. Daniel confirmed Brooke had booked the same dates. That was when I understood something important. Silence is not weakness when it's chosen. Sometimes silence is preparation, and preparation is power. By the time Eric returned from that trip, I was no longer waiting for proof. I was organizing it. What came next would end everything. Not loudly, not emotionally, but completely. Eric returned from Florida relaxed, careless. He brought a small gift from the airport and mentioned that the meetings had been exhausting. I thanked him and set the box on the counter. My face didn't change. Inside, I already knew where he had stayed and who had slept beside him. Daniel had secured everything: hotel entry times, shared meals, photos of them walking together like a couple with nothing to hide. It was no longer just an affair. It was a pattern of shared life. A week later, Eric told me something new. He said the commute was wearing him down and suggested renting a small place closer to work during the week. He said it carefully, watching my reaction. I nodded, told him to do what he thought best. That decision opened the final door. Daniel confirmed Brooke had moved into the same condo. Parking logs showed both cars overnight. Grocery purchases lined up on shared days. Utility accounts were activated. They were no longer sneaking. They were living together. That mattered. Cohabitation removes excuses. It removes confusion. It turns a story into fact. We chose a Monday morning, 10 a.m. Both attorneys ready. Both cases filed within minutes of each other. No warning. No confrontation. By Wednesday, the papers were served. Eric called in a panic, asking where I was. He rushed home, holding stamped documents with shaking hands. His voice was loud, but his eyes were empty. I told him calmly that I knew everything, that I had photos, dates, records, proof of the condo, proof of the trip, proof of the life he had built while pretending ours was intact. He tried to speak, but nothing came out. When I mentioned that Brooke's husband had filed the same day, his face collapsed. That night, the house was silent. Not the quiet of avoidance, the quiet of exposure. For the first time in months, the truth had nowhere left to hide. And I finally slept. The weeks that followed were quiet and procedural. Eric tried to negotiate. His attorney reached out with numbers that seemed reasonable on the surface, but ignored responsibility. Daniel told me Brooke did the same. Both wanted the story to end quickly and quietly. We declined. When people are caught, they often want forgiveness, without accountability.
The court does not work that way.
The hearings were not dramatic. No speeches. No shouting. Just documents reviewed one by one, photos, timelines, financial records, signed agreements, entry logs. Evidence does not raise its voice. It simply exists. When excuses were offered, they collapsed under timestamps. When blame shifted, it contradicted signed documents. The judge didn't comment on emotions. He commented on facts. Weeks later, the ruling came. The marriage was dissolved, responsibility clearly assigned. Asset division reflected that responsibility. Damages were awarded not as punishment, but as acknowledgement of harm. Eric moved out quietly. He apologized once. I accepted, without reopening the past. Closure does not require reconciliation. Daniel received a similar outcome. We spoke briefly, once everything was finalized. There was no celebration, only relief. What surprised me most was how light my home felt once the truth had passed through it. I repainted the walls, opened the windows, reclaimed the kitchen table where I used to work, and started sleeping through the night again. Looking back, there are things I wish someone had told me earlier. Trust patterns more than words. Do not confront when you are confused. Confront when you are prepared. Protect your finances, your documents, and your support system quietly and early. Silence is not weakness when it is intentional. Waiting does not mean accepting. It means choosing the moment that protects you. This story is not about revenge. It is about self-respect supported by evidence. I did not win because I waited. I won because I waited with purpose. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who may need to hear that patience can be powerful. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Would you confront immediately or collect proof first? Subscribe to The Art of Revenge for more stories about quiet strength, real consequences, and starting over with clarity.